Okay, so for my talk, I decided to look at science within the sustainable fashion world, given that's sort of the focus. And so I looked, the first thing I found was all of these pictures. I don't know if you can, I don't know if you can see them all, but they're all types of leather, and they're all types of leather that aren't actually leather. So I found the idea was to look for lots of different types of vegan or fake leather, which are all considered to be better than real leather, because the real leather industry, you're killing lots of animals, so if you're vegan or vegetarian, that's sort of not an option. And also there's often issues raised about animal cruelty, and also when you tan or like process the cow's skins to make the product that you then use for shoes or bags, there's lots of harmful chemicals in the tanning process, which can not only harm the workers who have to go through all of this, but it also can pollute water and poison people, so not a very good thing. However, a lot of leather substances that you use are made of plastic, so usually like PVC or polyurethane, which also involve toxic, bad chemicals in the process of making them. And also plastics are based off oil, like crude oil, which is also bad for the environment when you burn it, and then when it's finished its life cycle, it takes hundreds of years to break down again, which can also go into oceans and then harm fish and mammals, and then that's a cycle. Some of the other types of leather I found which were actually better than either plastic leather or real leather were types of leather made of cork. So I found one where they use the bark of cork trees, and cork trees, when you take the bark off, it actually means that the tree takes in more CO2, which is better for the environment. There's also a picture of Erstas substitute, which I found from during Germany's World War II era, where the Nazis wanted to find lots of substitutes for real items so they wouldn't have to import them. And this one was made of paper, so they found that they could use this for lots of things except shoes, because if you use it for shoes, all of the wear you put into them would cause it to break apart. I also found lots of interesting, like, newer versions of ways to make leather, so making it from pineapple leaves, or apple pulp from when you pulp apples to make juice, and then you've got all the extra stuff left over. And then there was also a company called Fruit Leather Rotterdam, which I found, which is making leather from fruit waste, which is from fruits that are deemed not good enough for supermarkets. There's a whole thing about the misshapen fruits going on. I really quickly wanted to touch on something called greenwashing, which I found a lot of during my research, which is the practice of making a claim, of a company making a claim that says that their practices or their products are better for the environment than they actually are, because they don't back it up with research showing that this will actually make this product better for the environment. And an example of this is, of course, fake leather, because, well, the plastic version especially, it's still bad for the environment, even though it is not killing animals. Quickly moving on, there's this company that I also found called Orange Fiber, which I thought was really interesting because they make fabrics out of orange peel, because within an orange there's something called cellulose, which is a sort of sugar, and it can be taken apart in long threads and then you can weave it in. But what I also found was that they mix their orange fiber with traditional fibers as well to create their fabrics, which is still using traditional materials, but it's still quite interesting how they're recycling orange peel to make something new. I also looked a little bit at how technology is being used within the fashion industry. So those pictures there are from 3D printing clothes. 3D printers are a relatively new technology, but they're creating these sorts of honeycomb or lace-like structures out of plastics, actually.
Wow.
which I thought was really interesting. The original idea, I think, was that they would be able to print clothes like at your home, or you'd be able to like have it specifically made to your measurements. However, I also noticed that this is actually quite cost high, and it's also time consuming, because to 3D print clothes takes a long time, and also each piece has to be, at the moment with the technology they have, you have to individually assemble each piece to each other, so it's still like you're attaching the panels to one another to create the finished garment. I also found that they've been creating these clothes renting apps. So this has been in the news quite recently, such as an app called Rent the Runway, which is used to allow people to rent clothes, especially evening clothes, and then wear them and then return them, and then they're washed and given out. The idea being that people can sort of fulfill their need to have new clothes and to be wearing new things without having to necessarily buy them, and then cause the production to be worse for the environment. I also then went on and looked at Goretex, which is a material that is incorporated into a lot of coats nowadays. The idea being that it's breathable for you to wear, but it's also waterproof. And so this was created in 1976, but it uses DWR chemicals, which are a type of fluoropolymer, which is very stable, so it's very good for when you're like wearing the coat, but then that also gives the coat a very long cycle before it breaks down. So if you then throw the coat away, it then takes hundreds of years, like plastics, to break down again, and that again can go into ocean or landfill. So a few facts that I found from the BBC when I first started researching was things like every year about, I don't know numbers, it's at 1,130,000 tonnes of new clothing is purchased in the UK, and an estimated £30 billion worth of clothing is sitting around in people's wardrobes not being worn because they bought it and then wore it a couple of times and didn't like it anymore. And I also realised that a lot of synthetic fabrics are plastic-based, well, all of them really, and meaning they take hundreds of years. So there's all the worry about like plastic bottles and recycling, but then clothes are just as bad for the environment, if not worse, because you have more of them, and they take so long to break down because once they've been woven and created. And then one last thing I found was this. This is a material known as Vantablack, created by a British company a couple of years ago, and it's actually made from carbon, and is carbon nanotubes, which are really, really tiny tubes of carbon rolled up into like cylinders, and they're grown so closely together on aluminium foil that light cannot pass through them, and so this absorbs like most of the visual light that you can see, because normally black clothes are still reflecting quite a lot of light, which is why they don't seem completely black, but this material is the closest humans have gotten to seeing a black hole. So I thought that was an interesting application of science. And I found this material conducts heat really effectively, and it's also stronger than steel, so about 10 times stronger than steel. So they haven't actually made any clothing out of it yet, because it's a really expensive material to get to grow and to get your hands on, and it's unlikely that they'll make it like available to consumers for a long time. But I still thought it was really interesting. So finally, just to finish, I found a lot of the scientific stuff that people are applying to fashion and clothing. A lot of it, some of it like Goretex is available like widely to consumers. A lot of the newer ideas, especially the sort of things applying to fruit waste and clothing, are actually still remaining at sort of the high end of fashion, so expensive items, because this is where the money for research is coming from. But hopefully over the years this will trickle down, and we'll begin to see all of these materials available available for most people to buy. So yeah.
Thank you.
Very well.